So let me tell you what's going on. So at this year's festival, we have, as a lot of you probably know, a special focus on human rights issues, on some of the crucial issues that we think that we need to sort of debate more openly and more frankly in Trinidad and Tobago that have to do with some very fundamental, rights and interests, and they touch on politics, they touch on the courts, they touch on all sorts of things. So this afternoon's conversation, as you'll have seen, is called Are All Rights Created Equal? And what we're trying to do is we want to start this human rights overarching conversation at the festival by asking who should be setting the human rights agenda, and should we be listening especially closely to some of our society's most vulnerable members, the ones who are most at risk, who are most at risk of damage, to set the overall agenda for everyone. Now, we have one kind of change to the panel makeup. We were supposed to have Inspector Derek Sharbody on the panel, but unfortunately the thing about being a police officer is you get called to court to give testimony. So he was not able to make it this afternoon, but he very kindly made sure that someone could come in his place, which is Pastor Clive Dottin sitting there, who is involved with the same youth organization that Inspector Sharbody is involved in. So he will be giving a similar perspective to what the inspector would have shared. And our fourth panelist, Gregory Sloane-Seale, will be here momentarily. But in order to not keep you all waiting, we're going to start the conversation, and then he will hopefully very seamlessly filter in once he arrives here in a few minutes. The only thing about doing a festival in the middle of Port of Spain is there's traffic, right? And it can be very unpredictable, and people get stuck. So we're not going to let that stop the conversation. Otherwise, on the panel, we have, at the far end, Keir Roopnarine from the Hindu Women's Organization. And next to her, Claudia de Verteuil, who has recently published a book that touches on mental health issues. So that gives you a sense of the diversity of interests and backgrounds and perspectives that we're going to be hearing from this afternoon. And chairing the conversation right next to me is a well-known public figure, Ira Mathur, well-known for many years as a journalist. She's also a fiction writer. And she's going to be managing the conversation this afternoon, asking some provocative questions, and there'll be a chance for all of you to be involved as well, to ask questions and to share your perspectives. So I'm going to hand you over to Ira, and I just ask you to give them another big round of applause to welcome them. We get the conversation started.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Welcome once again to the Big Ideas panel discussion on this first day of Bocas, and thanks for doing all the introductions for me as well. I'd like to make this into an open conversation between all of us, and in the last 20 or so minutes, I'd like you all to join in. But first, I just want to say a couple of things before we start. Human rights, what are they? The topic is obviously, are all rights created equal? So we need to define human rights. Well, the foundation of the Universal Declaration is that human beings are all born free and equal in dignity and rights. It sets out the basic human rights to which all people are entitled, and these rights are universal, inalienable, and these are your rights. And very quickly, some of the examples of your human rights are the right to life, right to equality, fair trial, free speech, right to vote, respect for your family life, education, enjoy property, right to housing, work, worship or not, associate with whomever you wish. And these may be further divided into other categories like civil, political, economic rights, and social and cultural rights. And secondly, our topic is a part question. Human rights do apply to all citizens, but should the needs of the vulnerable communities, the children, disabled, the mentally ill, lead in setting the agenda? It seems as if these very groups are under attack, with some very simple facts that I've gleaned over my years as a journalist. TNT has one of the highest murder rates in the world in a non-warring country, so we're just after Jamaica. This year alone, more than a dozen women were killed in cases of domestic violence. We're also very low in functional illiteracy, so therefore some 40% of our population is shockingly functionally illiterate. So over 400,000 of our people can only read signs. And we also spend the least in developing countries on health and education, even below Barbados. So that's a lot for me. I would like to just very quickly start off by asking each of the panelists, and after this it'll be an open conversation. Pastor Dottin, who in your view is the most vulnerable amongst us, and why?
Well, testing. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm representing, Officer Derek Shabadi, who you know well has done a tremendous amount of work. And in this instance, I'm specifically representing the St. James Police Youth Club. What has happened there is that, and I think children are the most vulnerable in our society, the group that needs to be defended more than ever before, and I would suggest women right after that. And I would also say, I don't know who will come first, second or third, but I think there are young men out there who are just drifting, and we provide a safe space for them and for young ladies also. Now, the St. James Police Club has been around for a long time. We have turned it from a club into an institution. And you will discover that the vice president of the group was a guy who was on the street hanging loose, Nicholas Singh, and he's now a member of the police service. And he is the vice chair to Officer Derek Shabadi. For the past 5 years, we have dealt with over 400 young people. We have turned the youth club on Sierra Leone Road into a residential center. So homeless kids can find a space there, because we feel, as much as we want to talk to young people and instruct them, they need to have a safe space, they need to have a shelter, they need to be educated. Officer Shabadi is very creative, so what we have there is we have turned the club also not just into a residential center, but into a suspension center. So the schools in Diego Martin and elsewhere send young people there. They can't manage them very well. They send them for professional counseling. And I'm one of the counselors there, along with 10 others who do voluntary counseling for the young people. I just want to give perhaps 2 quick experiences.
Do you mind if I come right back to you?
Yes, sure. Okay,
I just
fine.
very quickly want to introduce our other panelists as well. Claudia de Verteuil, just very quickly, who in you've written this magnificent book, which I have read and enjoyed very much, and I recommend that all of you get it. It's called Paradise Plums and Cocoa Beans, and it's about Claudia's personal experience with her sister Celia and the schizophrenia in the family. So, in your opinion, you're now studying psychoanalysis in the University of London. Who are the most vulnerable in this context?
Well, in response to what my former speaker just said,
Yes.
I think there's a crossover in the groups concerned, because you get women and children who are also mentally ill. So I think they're all a priority. I don't have one particular group in mind that I'd like to pick out as more vulnerable than the other, and there's certainly overlap between them.
So young men, women, children, you would say, yes. Thank you. We'll come back. And of course, this is going to be a conversation. This is just an opening thing. Keir Roopnarine, you deal a lot with women and children, and of course, the whole question of gender as well, and gender equality. Who is the most vulnerable?
I have to agree with my co-panelists that women and children are certainly among the most vulnerable. But in the context of Trinidad and Tobago specifically, I feel like a lot of our laws have yet to catch up with our society. And so there are a number of groups out there, like homosexuals, for example, transgendered people. They are also very vulnerable because we don't have laws that protect them, right? Or account for some of the discrimination that they may face, right? If I'm not mistaken, we've also been struggling for a really good national gender policy for quite some time. And I think that says a lot to the kind of vulnerability we see in our women, particularly.
Perhaps I could just get the conversation going by asking, because all of you have worked on the ground, you've worked with young men, you've worked with people, and you're a psychoanalyst, and you've worked with women. Perhaps you can each speak to one another, and all of us, of your personal experiences, and let's just exchange some ideas. Pastor Dottin.
Well, I want to begin with the issue of children and young people. This week, we had to face some challenges at the youth club, which are not new, but to my mind, the challenges are expanding. We had a young man who we were counseling, he had already been to two institutions, two residential institutions run by NGO organizations, and perhaps we have to look carefully at those organizations, so taking in young people who are psychologically scarred, emotionally wounded. But this young man is now 16 years old, and he had a challenge, and the particular challenge he had was that his father was, forcing him to use guns and to kill individuals and to destroy people and push drugs. Now, I have had that experience with young graduates in Port of Spain West that will tell me children in common entrance class in Standard 4, when their parents are forcing them to package drugs and to, transport drugs, what should they do? Should they disappoint, should they disobey their parents? And this young man told me, he said, Pastor, if I tell you my story, you would cry and I would cry, and we both cried. Because, we men do like to show emotion sometimes. But this young man is the example of a guy who had to really run away from his parents. And I am finding, as I look at this crime thing and murder rate, there are a lot of children who virtually have been turned into street children because they have to run away from their parents. I met a guy, I work for Serval also. In fact, I work for 12 institutions. I mean, voluntarily. And there's a guy in Serval whose father, the first murder he committed was with his father. His father was also, an assassin. And he told me he couldn't sleep for 2 weeks straight. And I congratulate groups like Serval for doing the amazing work that they're doing. And it's through Serval they network with, with people like ourselves. And we had to bring that guy to a place where, he could experience a comfort zone, could feel safe. And I personally feel that children have a right to be defended. They have a right to be respected. I mean, the respect word is a big word in our youth club. No one is allowed to disrespect, either male to female or female to male, or children to adults or adults to children. We have, by God's grace, created that safe zone. But I'm saying that these are issues we have to look at in a country where the murder rate is high and we have a lot of paranoid people. The word schizophrenia comes to being because some of the young people come to us and they have lost the ability to feel. They have what we call flattened affect. And when they lose that ability to feel, to tell them to care for somebody is a difficult process. And in the counseling activity, we have to move them from where they are to where they want to be. And I have found when you show interest and show love, and by the way, children know and teenagers know when you love them, when you care for them. No matter how psychologically scarred they are, they know, when you love them, when you care for them genuinely. And part of that is the consistency with which the amount of time we spend with them.
Yes, I certainly endorse that. A very important part of the book that I wrote is all about that, keeping connected with family. Even though my sister suffered from schizophrenia, this was very important to her through all the letters that she wrote home, on which the book is based, that connection was vital to her and in fact to keeping the family together. The other point I wanted to pick up was the very early one you made about human rights and that we can take for granted. Those of us who are not dependent or marginalized in the way that the groups that we are talking about are. For example, the right to education. My sister developed schizophrenia very early on. She was only 14, and we can take the right to education for granted, but she couldn't. And I'll just read a little, one of her letters where it sort of sums up the complete breach of her human rights in this respect. First find my glasses. Thanks. This was in 1960, 3rd of April. Dear Dad, I am still in the bin with all the others who have been chucked out. We might wonder, chucked out from where? Does she mean chucked out from society? For breakfast today we had fried bread and bacon, toast and butter, porridge and tea. But instead of tea, I had milk, and instead of porridge, I had cornflakes and milk and sugar. So you see what I mean when I say I want fruit and topi tabs, because the food is ghastly. So please, send some more grapefruit and anything that will keep before the crop is over. Please hurry up and send me to school in England, and please take me out for the summer holidays, because I would like to go to school in England, or if you would rather, take me out for good and take me back to Trin. Your loving daughter, Celia. A letter that she wrote home to my parents after being sent to England for treatment, where it was hoped that she would be cured, but of course never left. And that's what the story is about, and her continuing to write letters in order to keep the link with those she loved and those with whom she knew loved her. And that's your point about love and the importance of love in that relationship with the vulnerable.
I'd like to take a quick moment to welcome Gregory Sloane-Seale. And we understand traffic issues. He's been working on behalf of at-risk youth at a community level for over 20 years. And you are the National Coordinator for the Citizen Security Program in the Ministry of National Security, Gregory. And one of its main objectives is the reduction of crime and violence in specific high-need communities in Trinidad and Tobago. So I'm going to give you a moment to take your breath take a breath. Basically, we've been speaking of the vulnerable in society and their rights. And right now, the space we are in this conversation is we've all been working on the ground, and I'd like to ask Keir Roopnarine, while you gather your thoughts, as to what are your experiences of working with women and children at risk, and particularly what are your thoughts about the very high rate of domestic violence, murders this year, and obviously that links back to the mental health issues that we've been talking about. Because for every woman that there was murdered, there are women who are not, and they're suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. They're suffering from perhaps rapidly bipolar and various anger issues. So perhaps you could tell us more.
There's so much that I could possibly say about this. Women, I think, so in Trinidad and Tobago, I think that we all have a sort of attitude towards women as being the cause. They're the cause of their own hurt, the cause of their own anything, right? Somebody once made a comment that we need to have better men in our lives, right? The overarching attitude towards what a woman is supposed to be doing for herself is at the ground level, right? And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who still believe in the traditional idea of a woman's place being in the home. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what happens when you have that situation and abuse is that sometimes a woman becomes financially dependent on her abuser, right? That's very common here, that women simply don't have the means to leave. And when children are involved, it becomes that much worse. I can't count the number of those things that I've seen.
I think everybody is a little bit avid to know, why the rise of domestic violence, particularly this year. Would you be...
I cannot imagine what's going on in the minds of those who are perpetrators of domestic violence. I don't know what's going on in their heads to say that this is happening more for a specific reason. I think that there are a lot of related issues. Some of it is masculinity and insecurity. Some of it is changes in attitudes towards feminism. Some men don't feel like a woman should have her opinion or voice it, and there are women who do that, or who have suddenly found the courage to do that, and maybe that causes consequences of the violent kind. Now, that's just one potential issue. There are countless, right? At the risk of derailing this conversation just a little bit, I want to touch a little on something that the pastor said about at-risk youth and those children. I've been having a discussion with a friend of mine very often recently where we've identified that, very few people decide they're going to kill a man for the sake of killing a man. Very often people do it because they need to eat, and this may be how they find the money to do so. Some people do it because this is what they think it will take to survive. And I think that's a question we have to ask ourselves about our at-risk youth and those people who are engaging in criminal activities, especially the young ones, right? We're talking about human rights, the right to an education, the right to food and shelter, the right to all of these things. I think we need to realize that part of the reason they're engaging in a lot of these activities is because they aren't able to take advantage of those rights the way the average person is able to.
So you're speaking basically of poverty.
Yes.
And the lack of education and the lack and those rights that they were never able to access. Now, I'd like to ask Gregory, Frank Rampasad, who was a former, he was a former PS in the Ministry of Finance years ago, and an economist told me just before he died on his deathbed that men are going to be increasingly, young men are going to be increasingly at risk in society because women are outperforming them in schools and academia and other areas of life. And of course, the Caribbean has now become a matriarch, maybe because of out of necessity, but are men beginning to feel marginalized? Are you seeing that in your work?
Wow. Okay, well, you know, I speak a lot about patriarchy and its negative impact on males, okay? And we do live in a region that patriarchy has set certain social norms and standards that are really unrealistic and unhealthy for males, young boys and men alike. Given the shift socially, economically of women due to the women's movement, and rightly so, it has created a bit of confusion for men and males, especially operating within a patriarchal construct that still enables and sort of dictates that men be the head of the household, right? And with that should be the main income earner, the main decision maker. Where emotionally as boys, you still hear, I hear it still, don't cry. If you want to express yourself about something emotionally, it's like, oh gosh, you're acting like a girl. So all these things that are repressed over a lifetime is going to come out in some way, shape, or form. So what we're seeing now is just a crescendo of decades, centuries of this pattern of thinking and of being that was quite comfortable as it was prior to, let's say, women, stepping up to the plate and demanding equality, which is very fair and acceptable, and I think late in coming. And yes, within the region for sure, in Trinidad, we do have a lot of conflicting emotions and views about men. I don't think men are at risk per se, because men still run things in Trinidad and Tobago. A lot of men do talk about being repressed, oppressed, and women taking over and so forth. But once again, the Caribbean has always been, in a strange way, matriarchal, because the house, the women and the mothers are the ones that really keep the communities together and keep things together. So that's always been there. I think just because of, maybe more so because of the social, educational, and professional advancements of women, that has sort of given a shift to men, and where men start to think, well, oh gosh, but everything is still owned and operated. The majority of things are owned and operated by men. If you look at the media that drives public opinion, personal opinion, it's men who own the main media houses. If you look at the conglomerates, they are run by men. If you understand what I'm saying. So it's still a man's world, it's still a man's island, it's still a man's region. So
I think I was speaking more about at-risk men you're working with, and perhaps, Keir, you wanted to make a point about that.
So I agree with a majority of the first part of what you said, right? But I feel like saying something like men or young men are not at risk is a bit too general. The people who are in power are almost never at risk because they are the ones who get to decide what's happening. But just because there's a man in power does not mean that the boy on the ground is not at risk, right?
No. I totally agree. I just wanted to kind of debunk this general feeling. Listen, in this current situation, we're all at risk, okay? All children are at risk. The difference is those children who have access to remedial whatever, psychosocial support, economic support, these sort of things, okay? But the kids that live behind the bridge in Belmont, in Laventille, in Embacadere, in San Fernando, in the train line in Arima, and the kids that live in Westmoreland, Blue Range, where I reside, and other places, they're equally at risk. Because what we are exposed to socially through multimedia, just through a culture that has been over the years promoting quite a bit of violence, a lot of misogyny, right, woman hating, and we saw it play out in the U.S. election, which was all over the world. It sort of has given even more license for this sort of just being at risk in general, right? So the difference is, yes, poverty does determine what level of access you have to services that can support and help you to move out of your current state. But I will say that really and truly all at risk. I see it every day. There are kids whose parents can afford to send them to schools where they can get more focused attention, and then there are thousands that don't have that. There are those parents who can afford psychosocial support for their children through counseling and so forth. There are thousands of children who parents cannot afford that or don't even have the wherewithal to access that. So to me, that is the big difference.
Can we just make the point that about the universal human rights application, because what we're talking about are groups which are powerless and not able to access those rights. And it does beg the question that if you are without human rights, are you less than human? And does that actually influence how we see vulnerable people, dependent people, people with mental illness, children, women? Is it to do with power and our views of them as somehow less than human? And all the more reason why we must argue for human rights for these groups, I would suggest. Yeah.
I want to rush into the discussion now, because I will have a bias. My father was hardly in my life. So at age 15 he died. I don't think he ever slept home once. And whether there was active neglect or abuse or emotional or what have you, that was the experience I had. And I feel, to be frank with you, too many men in this society rationalize the abuse of women. And you may say I have a bias because of how I was, socialized. My mother was a very frail East Indian woman. And I could tell you, I told myself early o'clock when she died. And when they had my father's announcement, the other lady didn't put our names on. So my name was and others. So my Christian name is a conjunction. And my surname is a plural common noun. You know what I mean? And others. So that has put a certain kind of passion in me. And right now we have a guy before. One of the things the Police Youth Club does is to represent people before the courts. So the magistrate was getting a little tired of this 15-year-old and wanted to send me to YTC, and we said no. And I wrote a letter and I begged the magistrate, it's not the first time, to give this guy another chance. And when we had the counseling, and by the way, we cannot deal with the rights of children and not deal with the parents. Because here you had a father who had removed himself, displaced aggression kicked in, he put all the blame on shifted all the blame to the mother, and after 4 sessions at that youth club with Officer Shabadi, he confessed to me privately, crying, this big strapping guy, that he had really abandoned the boy, and what he was doing is covering up and blaming the mother. But it took 4 sessions lasting for 90 minutes before he accepted that. And to my mind, that is a major problem in the society. Thank God he had eventually admitted to his failings. But when a boy in the home, 9, 10, sees his father abusing the mother, all right, and seeing a society kind of laughing at it, and the Calypsonians trivializing it, and the culture, almost affirming that, you wonder what next. And therefore, we have to uncover the denial, break through that crust of denial, and face up to where we are. I promise people, and I tell my church that, anytime I see a guy abusing a woman, I will pray, yes, then I will jump on him, you understand? I have that personal commitment, and I feel we need more passion in the society, as much as the laws and the rights, but we must have a bigger, individual passion to protect, especially the children and the women, and of course the young men who are in danger themselves. Some of them, I see them at risk, some of them. Okay, but we need to have a greater passion and stop rationalizing abuse. This society is collapsing because we're rationalizing abuse and wrongdoing and corruption, etc., etc. I finish.
That brings me to my next point, the genesis of vulnerability. Is it the state that's keeping certain people at a certain level? Is it social workers who don't ensure that our kids go to school? Who is perpetuating the vulnerable in our society? Because the vulnerable are completely powerless. Who is looking after them? In your opinion, you're all doing work. Let's hear about it.
So I am completely biased, right? Let's just throw that
I like
out
that.
there. Okay. Fact, I am totally biased. As a member of civil society, completely biased. But we are always underfunded for everything that we try to do. Yeah? We are constantly underfunded. And we are the people. Now, I'm a volunteer. I've never been paid for any of the work I've done. And most of the members of the Hindu Women's as well. Most of the people that I know working with what we call at-risk groups or underprivileged groups or any of those things, we're all volunteers. We're all just people who genuinely want to see our country do better, right? Now, I will never stop doing that. But at one point, I have to eat. Now, I happen to really like food. You'll hear me say that I have to eat a lot. Yeah, you've already heard me say it twice today, 3 times now. But it means that I can't commit my life full time to helping the people that I know I can help. And there are a lot of people in our society who feel that way, right? So, again, totally biased. I think they're just not throwing enough money at the right places. We're not trying to build up education. We're not trying to build up our health system. We're building really nice skyscrapers. But I don't think that's helping anybody. Nobody's living there.
I would think
Yes.
I would think this occasion is helping. We're here talking about it, making it visible, giving the voiceless a voice. That was the whole point of writing that book that I did, was to give my sister a voice. She needed and wanted to communicate what her needs were and what she was experiencing, her longings, her sense of loss, her experience of schizophrenia. And it's about giving a voice. And we're doing that now, so it's a start.
I actually kind of want to disagree with that just a little bit. Because these people have voices.
They're just not heard.
Yeah, we don't need to give them a voice. We need to listen. And I think that there's a very defined difference there between giving people a voice and paying attention to what they're already saying. That's not something that we think about a lot. We always talk about we want to give them a voice, we want to give them a voice, we want to do good for them. They can do good for themselves. We need to give people the tools to do good for themselves.
Yeah, and if I can jump in there, I totally agree with that. For 11 years when I came back to Trinidad, I worked at the YMCA, so I was in civil society for 11 years, and the past 11 years I've been working in the Ministry of National Security coordinating this program. And one of the main activities within the program is to really empower residents who live in these communities to be able to treat with the issues that adversely affect their communities. So, you see, when we look at government, right, and over 11 years I've been working in government, but I still have a civil society mind, and I always have to remind myself when people say, well, government's not doing anything, that, you know, quite a bit is being done, but still it's being done in silos. So it's a lot of duplication and a lot of waste of resources, to be quite honest. I think if we were a lot more evidence-driven in terms of really, you know, collecting the data and analyzing the data and understanding what is happening on the ground, I think we would see a shift from over-policing and more social, community-driven social interventions. You know, because the communities that I've worked in over the last 11 years, well, actually last 22 years, because in EY we also worked in high-risk communities, what we see are a lot of persons who are very able to transform their lives. And I say able because, you know, physically, mentally able. But the willingness and the drive is just not there. They really feel like they're on the outside
Greg,
looking in.
Can
Yeah.
I quickly jump in here?
Sure.
I just wanted a very pictorial view of who you're dealing with. Are you dealing with hundreds of children? Are you dealing with orphans? Are you dealing with children whose parents are in jail? Are you dealing with abandoned children? Just give us a little bit of a demographic of what we see, what is out there, which a lot of us don't actually see from day to day.
No, the communities that we interface with are communities that we consider high needs, okay? And I mean, it's all of the above, pretty much of what you said there. And the individuals that we would interface with, I mean, we really try to interface with those who are, let's say, the highest at risk. You know, so a lot of the single parents.
An example
a lot of the,
maybe you could give us a single example, a singular example of what you're dealing with one of the boys at risk, one of the worst examples, so that we get a better idea, a more concrete idea of what is out there, what we're grappling with.
Okay, I mean, one story. All right. Well, I know a teenager who lives in a particular community that's crime-riddled, a lot of gangs, a lot of violence, and so forth. And he's really trying to walk on the straight and narrow. But on the day-to-day, it's an uphill battle for him because as an adolescent, peer pressure is very, very strong, right? That wanting to belong and so forth. So it's a constant struggle for him. So our approach is what we call a social ecological approach. We don't just single in on an individual without trying to influence the family and the community also. Because children, young people operate within many contexts, right? There's the individual context, how they feel about themselves, their self-esteem. Then there's the interrelational, family, peers, community, school, whatever have you, work environment. So our approach is really a whole of community approach where we interface with the schools in the communities we work in, with faith-based organizations, the police also, among others, right? I mean, I know young girls also who face a lot of stress with regards to sexuality, you know, from the time they hit puberty. There's a lot of a pull to, for lack of a better word, become prostitutes because of the economic situation of their families and so forth, you know, and there are a lot of men out there who are willing to pay for sex, to give them food for sex, these sort of things, you know, and these are the things that we are working with on the ground, and still it is something that, you know, we need to shift our focus to a more preventative, you know, and a more proactive view of dealing with these social challenges that we have, as opposed to coming in after the fact, you know, and you know, having these children. I mean, most of the kids who are in St. Michael's Home, St. Jude's for girls, the orphanages, YTC. When you sit and you talk with them, you recognize that they have, by and large, lived a life of gross neglect and or physical, emotional, mental abuse. Okay? And then they get into the system, they run away from home, they get involved in illegal activity, they end up before the courts. Then they end up in the government system one way, shape, or form, and then it just kind of spirals from there. You know? So these are the situations that we're dealing with, and it's heavy situations. You know, the government, I'll give you an example. People say, okay, the government's not doing anything. And I'm not supporting government, trust me on that. It's just that we have to find a way to really channel the resources into areas that will have higher impact. Okay, I mean, in schools right now, you can get a hot breakfast, a hot lunch. Okay, it's supposed to be geared towards those kids who don't have. Okay, but I mean, it exists. I mean, there is the concept, and I say the concept of universal childcare, early childhood education, primary school, secondary school education. Okay, so that's there. The quality, questionable. We'll leave that for another conversation. But there are all these things. Now, it's how do we harness the resources that we have, right, and marry it with what is actually happening on the ground, so that we can address those most at risk and most vulnerable. Because as I said, we're all at risk, but the ones who we need to look out for and we need to address, especially within a human rights context, are those who are at risk and have limited options to get out of that risky environment so that they can live a more fulfilling life.
I just want to congratulate his organization, because two of the groups I work with, the Love Until Foundation and the St. James Poetry Club, we have benefited a whole lot from your organization, the CSP. So I think a round of applause would be nice, folks. And I'm sure we're not the only groups that are benefiting. I just want to say this, however. I want to deal with a case involving a 6-year-old and a 12-year-old. All right? 6-year-old, both of them girls, and living right now in Trinidad. The 6-year-old is the grandfather taking on the responsibility. Let me tell you something. Some of the most vulnerable people right now in the society are grandparents. Because they have to take up the slack from the parents, slack from pastors. The second case is about the role of pastor played, it was terrible. But in terms of the 6-year-old, I mean, I was just shocked to know after the grandfather went to court, this child was sexual abuser at age 5. And the security groups had them going from station to station. And eventually a police told the grandparent, if anything happened to the alleged abuser, we come in for you. Now, what kind of, finger-licking dotishness is that? Here's a man who is concerned about his child and the impact, the emotional scars on the child. And you are telling me that you are threatening him now in case anything happened to him. The alleged abuser, you coming for that. So in other words, you find him guilty already. The second case is a case in Northeast Trinidad. And Officer Shabin and I went to that case, Northeast Trinidad, very far from here. And do you know, let me tell you the institution that failed that child. The courts failed that child. The pastor of the church of the abuser failed that child because he wasn't hearing anything about his member. Because his member is an angel that collapsed from heaven. The courts took the case, they made an order for the guy to stay away, but never really helped enforce that. So the parents now had to put this child, who is in secondary school now, almost turn the house into a jail. So I wonder how really genuine we are. And we have to call on the institution, state and every other and private, to really show a greater level of seriousness in terms of the protection of the vulnerable in society. We have a real problem. That is why the bandits and they feel that they are on the brink of taking over the society, and they might be very well correct. Because we lack the courage to stand up for the vulnerable. And I'm saying we have a right to defend each other. Forget the race now and the walls, let's start building bridges. I am making a call for that this evening because I fear many more are going to die this year. Because we are not, look at the courts. I was in the court Monday for Shannon Banfield's 5th hearing. And it hasn't moved, and now we changed the magistrate, you know what I mean? And she has to get instructions. And you have these boys. We created the situation yesterday. We as a society, and because of the institutional failure, created what happened in the courts yesterday. I was in that same court, all right, on Monday. And I mean, I could tell you how the young people were friends of Shannon Banfield. Nobody has been charged for Rachel Ramkissoon. The child, her results came out after she died. And nobody has been charged. And I had relatives saying, you know, well, like, we have to take this law into our own hands. And I hope we realize where we are in Trinidad and Tobago. And each of us accepting a certain level of responsibility. Each of us, meaning politicians, business people, councillors, all of us. I feel some councillors charge too much. You know, that's my frank, I know you have to live, but at the same time, I feel some councillors charge too much. And looking at the clock when the hour passes, start charging for the second hour. So that, to my mind, there's an insensitivity that dominated the culture right now that we have to address, you know.
And I think that leads me to my next point, and I would like to direct this to you, Claudia. It's very apparent to me that there are two types of mental health issues. The one is obviously created by life circumstances. You know, like I mentioned before, I think there's lots of women and children, from what you were saying, Gregory, and you, Pastor, and yourself, suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, you know, battered wife syndrome, the bipolar created from life circumstances. And I have, with so many murders in this country, over 146 last year, we are a society of grieving people. So there is that mental health issue that we are dealing with. So the vulnerability has led to a whole mental health problem in the society, I would say, that's caused by circumstances. And then there's the others, like you sadly suffered with your sister, schizophrenia. Now, you were very lucky, in a sense. I know it was a tragic story, but you were able to get your sister some help in some form in institutions in England. Now, can you imagine in Trinidad, where the stigma is so great of even going to a psychiatrist or a therapist, you're immediately called mad, and a lot of these people just end up on the streets because they're not able to carry on. So could you elucidate on that a bit?
Well, that just reiterates my point about the importance of talking about it and breaking down the stigma associated with mental illness and the impact, like you say, of the violence in society in Trinidad and Tobago at the moment, that the underlying fear that people must be always under. I've only just arrived, so I haven't picked that up yet, and I don't want to, but from what you say and the level of violence, particularly against women, it must just be a fear that you live with all the time, and one just has to wonder about the psychological impact of that. But the importance point is that we've got to make mental illness much more visible and recognize it for what it is and understand it and make sure that we apply the human rights for the mentally ill and decide, of course, as a society on what constitutes human rights and the difficulties in applying them universally to the mentally ill, because the mentally ill are not just one thing; they are many things, and to all the different needs of vulnerable groups, the complexities and difficulties in applying them. I think this is one of the points that was brought out by you in the courts. I don't know that particular case, but it makes the law look very stupid in some ways, and so there's a lot of work to be done.
I'd like you to each very quickly give me some solutions, but before we do that, I'd like Keir very quickly to address the whole question of the LGBT community in this Trinidad and Tobago. I was wondering, as you're working with gender issues, I mean, women and men can actually be imprisoned for being gay, homosexual, lesbian in this country. The laws here are very archaic. And if you're talking about the vulnerable, they certainly are vulnerable because actually laws aren't even applied to them. So perhaps you'd like to talk a little bit about marginalized communities such as these. And I'm maybe even disabled, the marginalized communities that people don't like to talk about much in our society?
I'm not sure I have the authority to speak on on that very much. I do work with an organization that deals a lot with gender, but the HWO specifically has not taken a particular stance on the LGBT laws or those laws that may or may not govern people within those groups. I personally, forgive me if I'm not allowed to say this, but I personally support full rights for those of the LGBTQI and any other label or descriptor or whatever you'd like to call yourself, right? They're human beings and they deserve what everybody that we've been discussing here deserve. I do know a few people who identify, and for the most part, they are often scared. Much like we have women who are afraid to go out at night because of what's been happening recently, they're very afraid to tell people that this is how they identify or this is what they feel or need. And if people can't speak, as we were talking just now about voices, right? Not giving them a voice, but having their voices heard. If you are not comfortable to speak for yourself and tell us what you need, how is society ever going to make those changes to support you, right? The fact that so many people in Trinidad and Tobago are particularly homophobic, which they are, I think that as a society we have very strict and traditional values, is causing a lot of problems for my generation and the generations coming after me. From people who are raised, they understand that feminism is a thing, they understand that women have the same rights, they understand that women should work, they understand all of these things, but they're still struggling with the traditional values of a man being the man at home, and a man should be the breadwinner, and a man should do this, and a man should do that, right? We have a whole generation and upcoming generations of men and women who aren't particularly certain what gender roles are. Now, I don't think gender roles should be a thing, but that's also me personally, right? It's a huge, it's just a mess. I don't even know where to go from there.
That kind of sums it up. But very quickly, I'd like to open up the floor in just about 2 minutes, but very quickly, and that gives you an idea of how much time you each have. Very quickly, if you had a kind of utopia of how you'd like to change things, perhaps I could, and what the solutions are, Pastor Dottin, perhaps you could start, and then we could go around. What are the solutions? Let's work towards that, all of us.
Well, I believe I would like to mention 3 things. And one of the things is, it was mentioned by Gregory and others, is to allocate resources to groups who really need them. I don't think we are doing a proper evaluation and monitoring of groups in this society. And therefore, there are groups like this police youth clubs who are crying out for more resources, and they're just not getting them. On a more philosophical level, I feel the church has a very important role to play in family enrichment. The whole issue of the family, to my mind, we shouldn't depend on the politicians to lead that. To my mind, religious groups should spearhead that in a special way. And when I say spearhead, play a bigger role. I mean, your families right in the church who are hurting, as long as we as leaders don't even know. There was a time when we would visit homes and that kind of thing, and I don't know if the postmodern culture, we avoid that and we just want to preach. But I want to put the first level of responsibility on my profession, religious organizations. Secondly, I feel prevention is better than cure, and I agree with what the speaker said early on. And I feel we should go into a program in the society and have a national, I think there are 2 things we need, a national grief care campaign, because this whole society is locked in grief and not knowing what's the next step. So I think we need to have a strategic plan for a national grief campaign. And the next one is we should have a strategic adoption plan for young people. If each of us in this room adopt one troubled youth, we could start to help this society in a positive way. But I think we have to look at the issue of family life and the issue of responsibility.
Claudia.
What would I hope for?
Yes, what's your utopia? What do you think is a solution?
Well, with reference to the mentally ill, and particularly to those who live in institutions, I would want some sort of protection for them and some way of keeping them safe. and free of institutionalized abuse and the full scrutiny that we expect from all other institutions, because these are institutions that are usually separate, and mentally ill are separated through their illness and usually live in institutions which are separated, who are total institutions and outside of the normal scrutiny that we have for other institutions. And in particular, more resources, particularly at the moment of transition into hospital and out of hospital back into the community, where the mentally ill are so vulnerable and need even more support than when they're inside.
Keir.
Well, in a utopian world, none of this would be necessary, right? No. I think, though, to bring Trinidad closer to that, what we need is a justice system that works for those vulnerable groups. We would need to change the laws that don't protect the people that currently need protecting. And we would also need, from our police force, go straight back into the highest echelons of our justice system. People that actually pay attention and work the law as it should be done. I can't count the number of cases where women have died from domestic abuse or continue to be victims simply because our police force did not respond as they should have, or these women were ridiculed, or the abusers were also members of the force. And so they weren't prosecuted, or they weren't arrested, or they did not even receive a slap on the wrist. That happens a lot. And so I think that if that system could be fixed to actually deal with the problems that are brought to them, then maybe we'd be one step closer to where we need to be.
Brilliant, thank you. And Gregory.
Well, in order for us to achieve what we want to achieve, we have to have a mental shift, in terms of how we view ourselves as individuals. And you see, we're talking about human rights, and with human rights, I always peg human rights with responsibilities. We have laws, we've ratified the Universal Human Rights Declaration, the children's rights, mostly all of the UN instruments we have ratified. We have laws. The problem is getting to that mental and emotional state of being where we as individuals recognize our role and responsibilities in uplifting those rights, And that this can be done through a really focused curriculum within primary schools and secondary schools. We've been talking about civics and this sort of thing forever. But I think it's very important that the school system, because it's such a catchment area for so many of our citizens, and at a young, impressionable age too, that we have equal focus on human development and child development, adolescent development, relationships, all the cognitive and emotional tools that are required. I think we should spend equal time developing that amongst our school-age population as we do with academia. Because as we continue what we are seeing, and everyone complains who has businesses, I'm sure there are business owners out there, people come in with degrees, not only from local institutions, but foreign institutions. They come back to work. Many of them, they can't function at the level that you would think they can function given their MAs, PhDs even, whatever have you. So it's a whole, we have to start from young, and it can be done if we put the focus there.
Thank you, and now I'd like to open the floor. If there's any questions, I think the gentleman here was, if you can keep them quite short because we don't have much time, because, yes, yes, everybody, thank you.
Trying to tie together a lot of what you said, I heard an interview with a woman who ran a charity to protect children that were being genitally mutilated in Tanzania. And they had a home that protected them, and they had a legal agreement preventing further cutting. And one of the things that struck me as you were talking were that these micro solutions only go so far. Because the reason that they were being cut was a girl that had been circumcised was worth 12 cows instead of 6. And the person who did the cutting got a fee, and a tribal elder had a fee. So that structurally, beyond the immediate abuse that you are solving, you rapidly run into a structural problem that has to be addressed. And that is a cultural and institutional problem that has to be tackled head on with funding, with a shift in the culture, in the society. Where are those big questions in Trinidad? Because you've all touched on it, but I know you're all aware of what's lying behind that.
I just want to say briefly, I agree with what you're saying wholeheartedly, and this is what I'm talking about. It needs to be a shift in how we view ourselves, right? Because if we can view ourselves in a more healthy way, then we'll be able to view others in a healthier way. Institutions, the system, all these things are operated and managed by people. Okay, so what we're going to get is what we have, unless there's a real mental shift in how we think about ourselves. And I don't think we have a healthy view of ourselves as Trinbagonians. We're the happiest islanders in a recent survey, but still there are very high incidences of abuse and self-abuse. You know,
Okay.
not to mention interpersonal.
The lady over here.
Hi, yes. Just to the panelists, how do you reconcile the dichotomous nature of religion and the rights of the vulnerable? So, yes, religions traditionally preach to take care of the vulnerable, but these kinds of prejudices we have against some of these groups, the LGBT, the mentally ill, the power structures of parents and children, husbands and wives, also have bases and foundations in religious beliefs. Trinidad may be a violent country, but it's also a very religious one. How do you reconcile that?
Well, to my mind, I should be the first to jump in here. Because it's that dichotomy explains that we in religion have not been doing a very good job sometimes, especially the area of caring. I think to respond to what you said just now, the issue of, I would like to see a return to, to values of the first value. There's no real, and she touched on it, there's no real national development or the development of the human being. Showing confidence in human spirit, teaching. I was part of a crime rally recently, all right? That became, it was really a segment of Christianity pushing the rally. And it was like pulling teeth without anesthetic to get people to realize, let's invite all the churches, including the Catholics and Anglicans and everybody else, because the evangelicals run it. And let's invite the Muslims and the Hindus and the Baha'is too. And to my mind, that is a major challenge we have in this society. Appreciating the value of each human being and respecting differences. It is a challenge. Now, should I say this? Don't call me homophobic because I don't agree with gay marriage. That is my spiritual conviction. All right? So I think it would be very superficial to call me homophobic. But at the same time, I'm saying we must have respect for everybody. And we must have respect for differences. And I think that is a challenge. And to my mind, in this society, we're building more walls and we're building bridges. All right? So I could disagree with you, but I could still love you. And that is a mental shift that this society has to make. And I think our politics is also part of the problem. Huh? When it's around election time, the love goes to hate. And I think why we have a murder rate, that we push more hate than love and compassion in this society. It's all about me. And that is something we have to address.
The lady in red.
Thank you. The first thing I want to say is that since I've been back, I noticed that Trinidadians and Tobagonians in general don't seem to care about much. It's something that I call like a deliberate obtuseness. And how could you possibly teach the children when there's no public education campaign to raise awareness, of what's lacking in society? Yes, you all are doing tremendous work, because I volunteer as well, so I've seen horror stories close up and personal, but still, something has to take place at the top. Now, the next thing is Pastor Dottin. I'm glad you brought up the issue of, you are not agreeing, you don't agree with homosexual marriage. But I think that's even taken a leap, because there has to be some sort of respect, first of all, and acknowledgement that the LGBTQI exists and that they have rights. And how can you possibly expect the religious community, and I am not religious at all, because I consider them a bunch of hypocrites, how can you possibly expect them to embrace this particular very vulnerable community when they all come out and say that it's a sin, to be gay? This is crazy. So, what is your proposal to deal with that? Because marriage is a leap. We're not even talking about marriage here, when we come to this vulnerable community. But what steps are to be taken to get this across that they are people just like everyone else?
Would you like to answer that very quickly?
Well, my position is this, that as a believer in Christ, I should follow his example and love everyone and teach my church members to love everyone. I could disagree, but I think where love really manifests itself, when I disagree with you and I could still love you. So I think that's where it has to start.
Okay, the lady with the glasses. Please. Yes, you. And then the BC.
I wanted to turn into a different thing. I am a mental health activist, but I'm also a person with bipolar disorder. The core of my activism is something that I think has to be very important with cross-cutting mental health issues, is that, okay, there is a problem, but there is hope. And I think that is the messaging that's being missed many times in these discussions about mental health, is that there is hope, that you can have a decent life regardless. And I want to provide a commentary, because I also do not just speaking and that kind of activism, but also policy advocacy. And I want to say a simple solution that we have for operating silos is this. I catch hell whenever people come to me and ask me, can you find this? Do you find this? I go online, I go search, and there's no list. There's no list of psychiatrists in Trinidad. There's no list. So a way to break through operating these silos is not only share the information, but disseminate the information about the services and the good work that you are doing widely and cross-disseminate it across sectors, because people are hurting and they won't look just by you. They look by social development, they look by CSP, they look here, they look wherever they can see an opening. And so that is a way to break down silos. Just provide the list. Just have listings.
Thank you. Yes, we need statistics. I think BC has been, and then the gentleman with the. Okay. I guess my husband has taken precedence.
I just wanted to say a few words. I represent an organization which, over the last 6 years, has spent about $500,000 a year in various support systems for Trinidad and Tobago. Where at the last Gravers Primary School, we spent 5 years, brought their grades up from the third worst primary school in Trinidad to the 161st worst primary school, which is a big jump. There are 482 primary schools in Trinidad. We've just spent another $600,000 on autism training for people in Trinidad. But we continue to do that. Lots of money has been spent. We support all the organizations that in fact that have been mentioned here. But what we've realized is that the money has been spent, a lot of work has been done, but we seem to be just solving problems, as you said, after they arise. So we've been looking at research as to how to improve the systems, talking to people at Harvard, at Vanderbilt University. We've brought them down here to talk to us. What they are saying to us is that perhaps Trinidad needs to work on improving parenting. Whether we start working, maybe there's a small pilot program operating in Denmark, where if you are a parent, you get certain amount of funds, but with that amount of funds, you need to attend training classes to be a parent. Some of the churches have it in Trinidad. I know the Hindu women have it. I know the Catholics have it. Some of the Muslim organizations. But where you are basically, as a parent, you've basically been paid to attend parenting classes. That is something I think we need as a country. We need to support. I think we've talked to lots of people. People are liking the idea. We need to get it into practice. We are willing to start funding a pilot program. So if anybody wants to talk to me about...
Great.
Okay.
Two things. One, I have the privilege of working with an organization called Parenting TT that does exactly the kind of things that you were talking about, providing parents with these tools, right? If you want, we can talk later. I'll give you their number, right? They do fantastic work. They actually have a fundraiser coming up next weekend. Absolutely. Absolutely. Right? And the second thing that I noticed is you're talking to experts in Denmark and experts from Harvard and all of that, but you need to talk to people here. You need to talk to people here.
Very good. BC, you've...
Yes, I've been waiting patiently.
I'm sorry.
No, I appreciate it. For better or worse, Mr. Dottin, you have a constitutional right to your belief. I can argue and I can bring evidence to show that we are worse off for your belief. But for better or worse, you have a constitutional right to hold it. It is ridiculous that in this day and age, we are actually having a conversation where your belief comes into your position. That is your belief, that is your position. Public policy cannot be formed on the basis of belief. Your belief is, I can't say in my respectful view.
You have a belief also. You are speaking from your belief system now.
No, I'm speaking from facts. I don't deny the age of the earth as being 4.5 billion years old. If your belief that gay people are not full citizens is to be...
But I never said that. I never said that. Don't judge me. Don't even target me.
Let me finish my point. If anyone's belief that gay people are not full citizens entitled to the protection of the Constitution like everybody else...
But I believe that.
But I wish you'd stop interrupting. I'm trying to make a point.
Let him make the point.
If someone's belief denies the rights of gay people, does their belief that they're entitled to smoke marijuana change the national law as well, if they happen to be Rastafarian? It is, to me, offensive that when given the challenge of treating citizens exactly the same regardless of their orientation, regardless of who they love, that you should hide behind the love of Christ, which, if you let it into your heart, would tell you that your brother or sister who is gay or lesbian is no different, whatever from you, and better than you in Jesus' eyes.
Well, I would love to respond to you.
Okay, Pastor Dottin, very quickly, because we only literally have about 4 minutes, and I'd like to take a question from that gentleman there as well.
I work with everyone. And when people come to my counseling office, their sexual orientation is not my business really. So I work and I love everyone. But I have a position and I am free to express my value system based, all right, on the Word of God. I am free to do that, and the Constitution allows me to do that, and you can't take away that right from me. That is subjective. It's like the girl who said all religious people are hypocrites. That's the most subjective, prejudicial statement you could find.
Right. Right. So I suppose that we're using a yardstick of human rights, and if your view, your worldview means that people who are gay and lesbian and that community is not given the same rights as every other human being on earth, then I think that there may be some flaw in it. But or if your view that so basically some of it is subjective, but I don't think that anybody's view should deny any human right. So that's my view. The gentleman with the black T-shirt.
Hi.
Dashing
Afternoon.
gentleman.
So, I mean, it's following directly to BC's point, but I don't want you to feel like I'm ganging up on you by any measure. I work for an NGO that specifically does sexual and reproductive health and rights work, specifically for LGBTI people. It's called the Coalition Advocating for Inclusion of Sexual Orientation. Just a few years ago, and maybe continuously since that point in 2010, there have been religious leaders from various parts of the United States of America, specifically from the evangelical denominations, who've traveled to Trinidad and other parts of the English-speaking Caribbean to say, in as deliberate a term as yours, that while we love people regardless of their differences, we certainly cannot allow LGBTI people to pollute their respective nations, right? And that's a kind of vocabulary that folks have tried to pair with the idea that we can still love these people, but our love, our Christly love, our Christian love, is specifically in an attempt to undermine the presence of LGBT people and communities worldwide. This is not to say that I think Christians don't love people regardless of their differences, but the vocabulary that they're using is specifically putting individuals in danger, especially young people who are still questioning and discovering their own sexualities. And it doesn't matter how much you, for instance, I have no doubt that you, Pastor Dottin, love people regardless of their differences, but the people that you preach to oftentimes do not. And they're responding to young people who are still discovering their sexualities or have discovered their sexualities with hostility and sometimes even physical violence. My statement, and maybe there's something that you can converse with based on that, is there a possibility that the vocabulary of the evangelical church and religion on a whole, regardless of the Christian belief around homosexuality, that the vocabulary around that could be augmented in a way that still shares that perspective, if that's something that's so important to you all, but actually protects the lives of young people who are at risk of emotional, mental, and even physical violence at the hands of homophobes?
Yes, I would agree with that. You know, all of us have to grow, because I have been in cultures where I am called, you know, because I don't have a certain belief system, I am called backward and not postmodern. So the discussion has to change both ways. The discussion has to change both ways.
Well, I think it's just about time to wrap up, and I think we can all agree that a truly civilized society is defined in the manner in which we treat our most vulnerable. And I'd like to thank our panelists, Pastor Dottin, as well as Claudia de Verteuil, Keir Roopnarine, as well as Gregory Sloane-Seale. Thank you so much for being part of this, and I'd like to thank this wonderful audience as well. Very quickly, just coming up, and I hope you all stay, there's a one-on-one with Godfrey Smith, and that's next, and there's about 150 events. So I hope you come back and stay with Bocas. Thank you all very much.